This is one of the batteries that we took with us all the way to the Arctic Ocean on the Go North expedition. We get asked all the time how the electrical system that we installed in the Lance performed for our trip. And today I'm going to walk through exactly what we installed, the pros and cons of operating without a generator, and how it performed for the trip. With recent advancements in battery technology and lithium-ion batteries being more and more available for use in big power applications, we were really interested in trying to use a battery system completely in place of having a generator with us at all for our trip to Alaska, northern Canada, and all the way to the Arctic Ocean. In the truck camper we took, we had it built without the generator option, and we didn't take a generator with us at all. Instead, we installed a bank of battle-born lithium batteries and an inverter that powered the entire RV whenever it was on. Batteries, of course, don't make power, so they're not a direct replacement for a generator. However, with lithium batteries, we can store days worth of energy, so we can store energy from alternatively generated sources like solar when the sun is shining during the day, or primarily, in our case, from the alternators in the truck, charging while we were driving. We could also charge our batteries off shore power, so anytime we plugged the RV into a pedestal at a campground or any electrical outlet, we could charge the batteries and store that energy for days worth of use further on down the road. The first question that we get asked is why not just use the generator that's typically installed in the RV? The RV that we took typically has a couple 1,000-watt propane generator installed in it, and it really came down to how we were going to use it. For us, we were filming and producing a web series called Go North over the 6 months of our travel, and we were going to frequently be utilizing our computers for hours on end, processing video, charging camera batteries, and creating the series while on the road. What that would entail with a propane generator setup is hours and hours every single day of generator runtime. That was going to be a significant drawback to us for a number of reasons. First of all, the noise. The generator is noisy compared to the silence of a battery and inverter system. Secondly, the propane use. Unless you're running a really high efficiency inverter-based generator, generators typically are very inefficient at low loads, and the generator would be running at a constant rate, burning a lot of propane even if we were only using a couple 100 watts at a time. This would burn through our propane reserves very quickly and make it much more challenging, requiring us to stop for propane much more often. The second option that we could have installed is a couple lithium batteries in line with the generator that's already there. This would make the generator a lot more efficient, as the generator could charge the batteries at a much higher load where it's more efficient, and then we could run off the batteries for the rest of the time, so it's quiet and we wouldn't have to listen to the generator and still have power all the time. While this system would be a good build, it would still require more propane use. The generator would run occasionally, so there would be the noise there, and it also, most importantly, added weight to the system. By adding the batteries and the inverter to the generator, we would add weight to the system that would take away from other things that we could carry. While we evaluated those two first options, we chose the third option, which is going all batteries and removing the generator altogether. This expedition was kind of a test. We were curious to see if we could function without a generator, not have to carry extra fuel, and just run off the power from the truck and some solar panels. For us, we also really didn't want the generator noise. We love being out in nature where it's quiet, and we were also filming a lot and had mics around and needed the silence of the system that we installed. In the all-battery system, we installed a Victron 3000 volt amp inverter that powered the entire RV, so we were still able to cook, run the microwave, run electric blankets, and the computers whenever we wanted. And the inverter is going to be much more efficient at using that power than running the generator. The one difference that we had to think about when installing these is that we had to make sure that they wouldn't freeze, and we were thinking that we were going to be in some freezing weather, which we did encounter later in the trip. We installed them in the location where the generator would have been installed, and while it didn't have any heat to the compartment, it did have heat to an adjacent compartment, and we drilled a couple holes through the sidewall, and that heat did bleed through, and even well below freezing, down into the teens, the batteries stayed around 40 degrees Fahrenheit, so we didn't have to worry about it. We did plug the vent for the generator and seal up that compartment because they also don't need to be vented. Lithium batteries can be damaged if they're charged well below freezing, but they will discharge. These batteries have temperature sensors in them and will actually shut the battery down if they deem that they are in a dangerous state that will damage the battery when you're trying to charge it. This build would have been completely infeasible before lithium-ion batteries because utilizing lead-acid batteries to do the same thing that we were doing and run without a generator would have required about 600 pounds, which was a significant portion of our cargo carrying capacity, and also we just didn't have the space. If you're curious, I put a schematic together that shows what we installed in the RV, and you can get access to that over on our website. Basically what we did is we installed 5 Battleborn batteries in parallel at 12 volts. Downstream of the batteries, we have a battery disconnect switch on the positive side and a fuse protecting the entire system. After the battery disconnect switch, they run through a fuse that protects all the rest of the system. If there was a short, if we dropped a piece of metal across these terminals, this fuse would blow and protect the system. These batteries, however, have internal protections as well, and they will disconnect if they see a short in the system as well. So it's really neat that we have a lot more safeties in the system using these lithium batteries than you would have with lead-acid batteries. On the negative side, we installed a shunt that monitors all of the power in and out of the batteries, so we can see how much we're charging and discharging the batteries. Now, because we need a way to monitor the system and figure out how much power is going in and out, we're using this device that's kind of hard to see. It's down here and it's called a shunt. And what that shunt does is it measures all of the power that goes in and out of the batteries. And this little device right here measures the voltage, and you can see right now it shows the current of negative 1.46 amps or negative 19 watts. So we are drawing 19 watts from the batteries into the RV. And this device here lets us know exactly what the state of charge of our batteries is very accurately. We're at 94.1% charged. If you don't have this device and you're just basing it on voltage, you really don't have a good representation of how charged your batteries are. So this device is very important, and normally you would mount this inside the RV, but because this device has Bluetooth, I can easily pull it up on my phone and see all of the information from this right on my phone. So that's how we actually monitor what's going on with the batteries. After that, the power lands on a couple of bus bars that distributes the power to the 3000 volt amp inverter and the DC side of the RV that powers all the DC appliances and lights. And what these bus bars are is they're basically extensions from the battery terminals that are here and here. We have 5 Battleborn batteries that are in parallel, which basically means they're all just connected together so the voltage all stays the same. It's 12 volts all the way through, but it provides us with 500 amp hours of usable power. And those terminals then come and connect from here on the positive first through a battery disconnect switch, so that if we throw this, we can completely disconnect the batteries from the system. From the factory, we had 2 100-watt solar panels installed on the roof, and they land on the bus bars as well to distribute that power either into the batteries or the electrical system. This part of the build is a pretty traditional solar setup for an RV, but what's unique about this system is that we ran 1/aught cables from the truck camper into the truck via a large plug and all the way up to the engine of the truck. These wires landed on one of the batteries installed in the truck's engine bay, and when the truck was running, would charge the battery system. Between the truck and the battery system, we did install a terminal fuse on the batteries in the truck and a fuse in the truck camper to protect both parts of that circuit in case there was ever a short. In line, we also installed the 225 amp lithium BIM or battery disconnect switch. This switch monitors the voltage from the truck and senses when it is charging and disconnects it when it is off so that it doesn't drain the batteries from the truck. From this electronic switch, we also ran a manual override switch into the cab that we could switch on and off to manually connect and disconnect the battery pack. From here, the cables run down along the frame of the truck, underneath, And about midship on the truck down here, we actually have a device that is a battery isolator, and it can disconnect the RV from the truck and only connects them together when the truck is running. This device also can charge the truck from the RV if needed, and we installed a little switch down here under the dash, and if I throw this switch, you'll actually hear that relay underneath click. That relay clicking is it connecting the RV and the truck together. 1/0 cable is pretty substantial cable, especially to run from the front of the truck all the way to the back. And the concept was that we were going to have significant current flow on this and minimal voltage drop so that we could get a really good charge from the alternators to the batteries. Installing the system was challenging because we were in very tight spaces, and getting this big wire installed in the truck was not easy. And if you're curious to see the build, we showcased it in episode 4 of the Go North series. So now you ask, how did the system actually perform? Well, the series itself proves that it worked because we were able to create the Go North series while we were on the road. While driving, we did get a very good charge from the truck, and it was the primary means of power for the trip. The solar panels did provide a decent amount of power, particularly in the midsummer when the sun wasn't even setting up in the Arctic. But as fall came around, their power significantly dwindled, and they really weren't enough for our power demands. We loved not having to listen to the generator, carry additional fuel, or burn additional propane. All of that worked exactly as we planned. We were able to use the RV as if we were plugged in all the time. We could cook on the Instant Pot. We were able to run our computers whenever we needed, and also some additional appliances, like Caitlin had a hair straightener, a hair dryer, and also an electric blanket. Halfway through the trip, we were also powering a Dometic CFX cooler with frozen salmon. We kept it about 3 degrees, and about halfway through the trip, when we started running with that freezer full of salmon, it was consuming a significant amount more power than we had started with on the trip. All that salmon got home just fine, and the system performed almost exactly as we expected. Because we installed this system once we were on the road, we really didn't have any time to test it. We did run into a little bit of a snag that we had not expected. The 2019 Ford F-350 truck that we were using had dual alternators, and we thought that the second alternator was going to provide all of this extra current and be able to easily charge the batteries with 100 amps. What I didn't expect is that that second alternator doesn't kick on until the system is already overloaded or once the system drops down into the absorption state of charge. For some reason, this truck liked to run the voltage at 14.7 to 14.9 volts almost all the time and rarely backed it down. Most alternator charging systems that I'm familiar with run at 14.7 for only a short bit until the batteries come up, and then will drop down pretty quickly to 14.2, even down to 13.9 or so for a float charge. This high voltage pushed a much higher amount of current through those big cables that we installed than we anticipated. We're getting charges of 150 to 180 amps, which is an immense amount of charging. This is great for rapidly charging the batteries, but not great for the alternators themselves, particularly because this truck would hardly ever run the second alternator that was installed in it. I did a little research, and Ford does this to try to help increase fuel economy of the truck by not putting the extra load of that alternator on until it's absolutely needed. But what that meant for us is that we were quickly overloading the alternators of the truck. The alternator in your vehicle's rating is typically the max rating. It can produce that, and it can produce it for a short period of time, but it's not designed to sustain that load for any extended period of time. And the rule of thumb is typically about 50% of that rated load is what it can sustain continuously. That 225 amp main alternator already had a significant load on it, and when we put the extensive 100 amp additional load, we were quickly getting that alternator very hot very quickly. We monitored the temperatures of the alternator and determined that it was getting too hot after about 7 to 10 minutes of charging, so we really couldn't charge the batteries for very long before we had to switch them off and let that alternator cool down. Now, the lithium BIM is designed to do this already. It switches the batteries on and off because the lithium batteries can suck current down so quickly that this is a common problem of overloading alternators in vehicles with lithium batteries. One solution to that is to install smaller wires, and it can't push as much current through. But we had already installed these big 1-aught wires, and we couldn't really change that. What we ended up doing is basically setting timers and manually switching the batteries on and off while we drove to charge for about 10 minutes and then let the alternator cool for another 5 to 10 minutes. We also monitored the voltage of the truck because when it was up there at that 14.8 volts or so, it would overload the alternators, but eventually, after sometimes a couple hours of driving, the truck would drop the voltage, and then we could just turn it on and charge the batteries at 60 to 80 amps, not overheat the alternators at all. The weird part is that it would kick on that second alternator when the voltage dropped as well. So now both alternators were providing plenty of power and they were staying plenty cool, and we could charge as much as we wanted with no concerns. All this being said, we got plenty of a charge, and it would take about an hour and a half to charge one of the Battleborn batteries, and we had 5. So it would take about 8 hours or so to get the batteries charged up all the way from 0 to full, but we were rarely at 0. We were typically 30–50% when we started charging them again. Later in the trip, when we were using more and more power, we did find that we were walking the batteries down and not quite getting enough charge because the cooler weather, we were running the furnace more, drawing more power. We were running the electric blanket at night to keep ourselves warm. And also that cooler with the salmon was drawing a lot of power to keep it powered up. So we would walk the batteries down, and about once a week, we would try to find a shore-based charging solution and plug in the camper and get it charged back up. Without any additional shore-based charging, we typically would get about 4 to 5 days of use out of the power that we could store in the batteries alone. Now, having said that we had a bit of trouble with the charging system of the truck, we did come up with a solution that we thought about implementing halfway through our trip, but we just were so remote and it was going to be challenging to do. What I would recommend if someone's interested in doing the same system is using a DC to DC converter in the vehicle to regulate the charge from the batteries and alternator to the lithium batteries in the RV. What these DC to DC converters do is take the power from the vehicle and modulate it so that it basically acts as a solar charger, if you will, modulating that power to properly charge the batteries and limiting or providing the proper current on the back side. What that's going to allow you to do is set a charge profile for however much current your alternators can handle and not exceed that, enabling it to run 100% duty cycle. This is not a novel solution. A lot of people have already done this. Battleborn even sells a DC to DC converter. We just kind of overlooked it, thinking that with the truck's dual alternators, it was going to have plenty of power to properly charge the batteries without overloading the system. With the DC to DC converter, you could also install smaller wires that are rated for the load. Typically 50 to 60 amps is what you're going to be able to pull from the alternators and push into the batteries. That would take about an hour and a half to 2 hours to get one of these batteries fully charged while driving with the alternator. Now, while we got a good charge while driving, a lot of people asked, well, can you idle the truck and still get that really good charge? In our case, because the truck was running such a high voltage, yes, we could idle it and still get a really good charge. But some alternators don't have the capacity to produce that power while at idle. With a DC to DC converter, this might help pull the proper amount of power even at idle to be able to use your vehicle as a generator just idling it. One thing to keep in mind though is that with these modern diesel trucks like we had, they have something called a diesel particulate filter in them, and they really can't be idled for long periods of time because that filter builds up soot and it needs to get burned off by driving. We did idle the truck a few times, but we wouldn't idle it for more than about an hour or so, so we'd only get a minimal charge before we had to drive it again. Now, our power demands were pretty significant as we were frequently on the computers drawing a couple hundred watts for hours on end every single day, and we typically would draw about 1.5 to 2 kilowatt hours of energy per day. We're frequently asked if we had to conserve power, and yes, we did conserve power, mainly because we were trying to save it for utilizing the computers. That didn't mean we weren't able to cook with some of the larger appliances like our Instant Pot or run the microwave occasionally, but we definitely didn't run the air conditioner for any length of time. We turned it on to see if it would run on the system, and it ran just fine, but it would completely deplete our batteries in about 5 hours. Now, for someone who's not charging cameras and processing video with a computer that burns 150 watts, this battery system would probably last much, much longer. Even if you were just to charge it up with shore power and utilize basic appliances run the TV and a computer a little bit, this system would probably last upwards of a week on just the stored energy. So comparing the batteries versus the generator, there's pros and cons to both. The generator, of course, you're going to have all the power that you want when you're running it, but it's going to be loud and you're going to burn fuel or have to carry additional fuel, whereas this, we didn't have to carry any additional fuel or worry about getting additional fuel, and it was silent. We had power all the time, even overnight, to run that heated blanket when it got cold. Both of them can be a significant investment. A small portable generator isn't going to cost that much, but you're going to have to carry fuel. But the built-in propane generator can be a significant investment, especially if you have it installed up front in the new RV. For us, using this system for 6 months and providing all of our power needs, we really enjoyed it. We enjoyed the silence and we enjoyed having power all the time. For future builds, I would do the exact same thing. Maybe I wouldn't need quite as many batteries if I wasn't going to be using such an extensive amount of power to run our computers and such, but I would probably add a few more solar panels on the roof and also that DC to DC converter to get a better charge from the vehicle and control the charge. Now, either a generator or a big battery bank like this isn't going to do you much good unless you actually want to use it, and that means going to places where you don't have hookups. Doing a trip to Alaska can definitely be done with going from hookup to hookup. There are campgrounds the entire way that you can stay at with electrical hookups. However, if you really want to get out there and go to some of those beautiful remote places, there's not going to be any utilities for you, and you're going to have to bring your own system. A lot of campgrounds also didn't have electric utilities, so for us to provide power, we didn't want to be that annoying person with the generator, and we just frankly didn't want to listen to our own generator. So this system really made sense for us there. So overall, the answer is yes, you can turn your vehicle into a generator and provide power for your RV. This system really enabled the entire Go North series, providing all of our power needs for 6 months. If you're curious to learn more, definitely check out the Go North series, particularly episode 4, where we build this system and visit Battleborn at their facility and actually build these batteries ourselves. The schematic of this system and more details can be found at our website, mortonsonthemove.com, and the link is provided below. Thank you so much for watching, and we will see you all next time.